Anglers won't need permits to fish the Top End's Daly River under a deal being finalised with Aboriginal traditional owners. The Territory Government has been negotiating over a High Court decision in 2008 that gave traditional owners control of about 80% of the Top End's coastline and rivers. The agreement with the Malak traditional owners and the Northern Land Council includes funding for a marine ranger program, a 2-year study into erosion, a new boat ramp and a code of conduct for responsible fishing. But despite this week's announcement, there's still uncertainty over whether permits will be needed to access many of the Territory's waterways. I spoke with Makepeace from the Amateur Fishermen's Association about what the deal means. Makepeace, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Louisa.
Is this agreement over the Daly a win for amateur fishermen?
Oh, well, look, it definitely is. I mean, the Blue Mud Bay decision came as a surprise. I think everybody thought that it would be a different decision, so we were all faced with the prospect of having to work our way through it. It's taken a very long time to get here. I mean, it's just over 3 years to get to this point, but the fact that some of these negotiations are reaching conclusion and that we are going to have permit-free access to some areas is great news, yeah.
How significant is the Daly agreement, considering it is an election year?
Well, I think the Daly agreement is the most significant of any area that you could have for recreational fishing in the Territory. I mean, the Daly is an iconic barramundi fishing river. I mean, ask fishers anywhere in Australia and in fact in most parts of the world and they'll have heard of the Daly. So from that point of view, it's almost symbolic in terms of how significant it is. But of course, it's just one area. There are still a whole lot of areas that need to be dealt with. So this is, I wouldn't say this is the end. This is the beginning of the end, perhaps, if we're lucky.
And how is progress going on those other areas?
Well, we don't really know. I mean, we're not part of the negotiations. It was always going to be a negotiation between the land councils and government, and we were happy for that to happen. I mean, government gave us certain undertakings. We've indicated to the government that we were happy with them undertaking the negotiations. So I can't really tell you how they're going, but the word that we've got is that that negotiations are nearing completion in a few other areas, but we're also being told by Indigenous groups around the Territory that they don't want to have a permit-free system. They want to do the same sort of thing that's happening in the Tiwi Islands. And we've recognised that if that's what they want to do, there's probably little that anybody can do about it, including the Northern Territory Government. So our approach to that is to say, well, if we're going to have areas where we have to have permits, then we need to be very sure that the areas where we don't are properly managed, that we have all the right sort of things in place to make fishing there as good as it can be, and that we have everything that's necessary to ensure that they're sustainable. And not just now, but as our population grows and more people are involved in fishing, we need to have long-term sustainability in those areas. So that's been the approach we've taken now for the last 6 months or so. Yeah.
On the Tiwi Islands, with the permit system there, there's reimbursement of that permit fee. Are you happy with that system? Would you like that to be adopted elsewhere or not?
Well, I mean, obviously we'd prefer not to have permits at all, but I mean, we were very pleased when government said, look, we recognise that, you know, because the negotiations are going on, the only way we can deal with this is to have a refund system. We were happy to say to government, well, look, we'll undertake that on your behalf, and that's what we've been doing. So, I mean, fishers don't need to be out of pocket as a result. Now, is that what's going to go in place for other areas that have permits? I don't know. We haven't had those discussions with government, but obviously as it becomes clear which areas will and won't have permits, that's what we're going to have to work out, sit down with government and work out how it happens.
Is it a fair expectation to have taxpayers reimburse fishers to fish on Aboriginal land or in waterways?
Look, I think that's a very fair question, and my only answer to that is to say that fishers in the Northern Territory are being treated differently to fishers everywhere else. The reason that we have the Blue Mud Bay decision is because of the Northern Territory Land Rights Act. The Land Rights Act is not an instrument of the Northern Territory Government. It's not something that the Northern Territory people voted for or a government that put it in. It's an instrument of the federal government. And if there is a problem with it, and that's really what it was, because you have to remember that both the federal government and the Northern Territory Government opposed the current decision. In the High Court, they argued against this decision. And therefore it's an issue, I think, not for Territory taxpayers, but it's an issue for Australian taxpayers, because that's where the problem started. And I guess if I have to put it as a short answer, I'm happy for the Australian taxpayer to pay for recreational fishers in the Territory to be on the same footing as rec fishers everywhere else. That's what it boils down to.
How far away do you feel we are to having this whole issue resolved?
Well, there's sort of a deadline. I mean, the deadline is, and admittedly it's a deadline that's been shifted now on a number of occasions, but there's an interim arrangement in place that allows permit-free fishing until, I think it's July this year. Now, I suppose it's possible that government could sit down with the land council and try and have that extended, but given that it's now gone on for 3 years, I would have thought that really that becomes pretty much a deadline to get this whole thing sorted out. Yeah.
And what are your areas of concern? Are they in Arnhem Land, the Roper River? What?
Well, the people who are who we've heard from, certainly Arnhem Land is one of them, and I don't think that's surprising. I mean, it's a homeland living area for large numbers of Indigenous people. We're hearing about that. We're hearing about Port Keats and the area around Port Keats, and of course, as I keep saying, the Tiwi have already done it, so we don't have to guess what the Tiwi's view is. They're already doing it. Yeah.
And what impact will there be on the Territory, do you feel, if this issue isn't resolved?
I mean, in the longer term, I'm hopeful that the impacts are going to be small, but that does mean that the onus will be back on government to look at how we make the fishing better in the areas where we can fish, to talk about what we do about permits where you are going to have permits. I mean, Aboriginal land permits have been quite difficult to obtain in the past. Can we make the water end of it better? They're the sort of questions that we need to be looking at,
Chris Makepeace, thanks for joining us.